Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. I want you to transport yourself directly into the cockpit of Air Canada Flight 143 back on July 23, 1983. Just imagine it. You're sitting at the controls of a brand new, totally state-of-the-art commercial airliner. You've got 61 passengers and 8 crew members in the back, just cruising on a routine flight from Montreal to Edmonton. Everything seems completely normal. But in just a few moments, this flight is going to make aviation history for all the wrong reasons. So this immediately presents us with this incredible mystery box. How does a brand new, highly advanced Boeing 767 suddenly transform into a 156-ton glider? Right? We're not talking about a structural failure here or some catastrophic engine explosion. We are literally talking about fuel exhaustion. 2 massive jet engines simply stopping midair. To understand how we actually get to that terrifying reality, we have to look at the exact moment things went from bad to utterly unimaginable. To really grasp the sheer terror of this event, we've got to start exactly here, at a cruising altitude of 41,000 feet over Red Lake, Ontario. It's shortly after 8 p.m. Central Time. Suddenly, the cockpit warning system sounds. It's indicating a fuel pressure problem on the left side. Now, the pilots, Captain Bob Pearson and First Officer Maurice Quintal, they just assume a fuel pump has failed. But within seconds, the left engine dies entirely. And then, just moments later, the right engine sputters and completely stops. A sharp, loud bong echoes through the silent cockpit. This was an alarm the pilots had literally never heard in training because flying with all engines out was just never expected to happen. Because this 767 relies entirely on its jet engines for electrical power, those advanced electronic glass screens, they go completely black. The crew is left with only basic, battery-powered mechanical backup instruments. No vertical speed indicator, no engine power, just the haunting sound of the wind rushing past the fuselage. Let's look at Section 1, Anatomy of a Mistake, the ground errors. So to figure out how they ended up in this nightmare, we need to flash back to Edmonton and Montreal. A catastrophic chain of human, technological, and procedural errors actually doomed this flight before the wheels even left the tarmac. It all began with a broken fuel quantity indicator sensor, or FQIS. Because the digital gauges in the cockpit were completely blank, the crew was forced into doing a manual calculation using a tool called a dripstick to measure the fuel volume in centimeters. Then they had to convert those centimeters into liters and finally into a measurement of weight. And that final step, that's where a simple math problem turned deadly. The fatal flaw literally came down to a simple conversion factor. The crew used a factor of 1.77, which is a number often misnamed specific gravity in the aviation industry. But here's the trap. 1.77 is used to convert liters into pounds, and this brand new Boeing 767 was the very first all-metric aircraft in Air Canada's entire fleet. The correct conversion factor they needed was 0.8 to convert those liters into kilograms. Because of this massive math mix-up, they punched roughly 20,300 pounds into the flight management computer, fully believing it was 20,300 kilograms. The computer accepted the number, making it look like they had plenty of fuel to reach Edmonton, but in reality, they had taken off with only about 45% of the fuel they actually needed. This cascading mix-up of metric and imperial numbers left them completely starved of fuel halfway through their trip. Let's move into Section 2, the 17-minute glide, 41,000 feet to zero. Returning to that eerily silent sky at 41,000 feet, Captain Pearson and First Officer Quintal are 120 miles away from their planned diversion airport in Winnipeg, and the clock is ticking on a 17-minute descent. They have to figure out how to keep this massive, unpowered aircraft from falling out of the sky. With no engines, they have zero power to move the heavy control surfaces on the wings and tail. But then, a brilliant piece of engineering kicks in. A tiny propeller called a ram air turbine automatically drops from the aircraft's belly. Driven by the wind rushing past the gliding plane, it spins up and generates just enough hydraulic pressure to let the pilots physically steer the aircraft. But, steering doesn't help much if you don't know where you can safely land. First Officer Quintal desperately needed to figure out their glide ratio. With the electronic screens completely dead, he had to calculate this entirely manually. He used altitude readings from the tiny backup mechanical altimeter, while distance data was relayed over the radio by the air traffic control radar back in Winnipeg. They absolutely had to know exactly how fast they were falling compared to how far they were moving forward. Well, they quickly did the math and realized they were dropping 5,000 feet every 10 miles. That's a ratio of roughly 12 to 1. To put that into perspective for you, they were descending way too fast. It meant there was absolutely no way they can make it to the Winnipeg airport. They were going to hit the ground long before they ever reached that runway. They needed a new plan, right then and there. Luckily for everyone on board, Captain Pearson wasn't just a commercial pilot. The guy was a highly experienced sailplane pilot. He knew they had to find a closer target, and once they did, he'd need to use this extreme, aggressive maneuver called a side slip. By crossing the controls, basically turning the nose one way while banking the wings the other way, he could drastically increase drag. This would intentionally drop the aircraft out of the sky fast enough to hit a closer landing spot without picking up dangerous amounts of airspeed. Which brings us to Section 3, landing at Gimli, a dangerous racetrack. You see, that alternate landing spot they found was a decommissioned Royal Canadian Air Force Base in Gimli, Manitoba. First Officer Quintal had actually served there, so he knew the runway was big enough to handle a 767. But he hadn't been there in years, and man, things on the ground had changed. Unbeknownst to the pilots, that runway was now a sanctioned racetrack. It's a beautiful Saturday afternoon, the place is packed with families, campers, kids riding their bikes. And because the 767's engines were completely dead, the plane made almost zero noise. The people on the ground literally couldn't hear this silent, unpowered 156-ton jet plummeting straight toward them. Dropping out of the sky with virtually no warning, the massive wheels of Flight 143 slammed onto the concrete. People on the ground just stared in absolute disbelief as this enormous commercial airliner essentially materialized out of thin air. Captain Pearson instantly stomped on the brakes, desperately trying to halt the massive momentum of the aircraft on a runway filled with civilians. The sheer force and velocity of that touchdown, combined with Pearson's aggressive maximum braking, was just too much. Two of the main landing gear tires blew out and exploded instantly. But even with blown tires, this huge aircraft was still hurtling down the drag strip at a totally terrifying speed. Then, ironically, a mechanical failure actually saved their lives. During the descent, the front landing gear hadn't locked into place, so when they touched down, the nose gear collapsed right back into its well. The nose of the plane slammed directly into the concrete, scraping along the ground and throwing massive sparks high into the sky. And this incredible friction acted as a huge, improvised brake, severely slowing the aircraft down. Seeing people dead ahead on the drag strip, Pearson applied extra right brake, physically steering the main landing gear to straddle the tack's central steel guardrail. Finally, 17 minutes after running out of fuel, the plane screeched to a halt, nose down on the tarmac, just feet away from terrified spectators. Miraculously, there was no fire. Just 10 minor injuries from the evacuation. All 69 people on board survived the whole shebang. Let's wrap things up with Section 4, the investigation and lasting legacy. Now, the crucial point here is understanding exactly who was at fault for putting those lives in danger. This terrifying incident triggered a massive board of inquiry led by Judge George H. Lockwood, directed by the Minister of Transport. They had to figure out how a simple fuel calculation could bring down a flagship jet. And this quote right here is incredibly important. Judge Lockwood firmly stated, "To suggest that the accident was the result of a metric mix-up is simplistic and inaccurate." The investigation proved we couldn't just blame the pilots or the ground crew for a simple math error. It looked past the individuals and uncovered massive corporate and systemic failures within Air Canada's operations. Because you see, Air Canada had inadvertently created a perfect storm. They integrated a single metric plane into an entirely imperial fleet. They completely eliminated the third flight crew member, the flight engineer, without clearly assigning the manual fuel calculation duties to anyone else. The manuals were confusing, the training on abnormal fueling was totally inadequate, and the communication between ground maintenance and the pilots had completely broken down. It wasn't just a pilot error, it was a total failure of the entire system. Amazingly enough, the physical damage to the aircraft was relatively minor. It was repaired right there in Gimli, flown out just 2 days later, and it actually remained in service as the famous Gimli glider all the way up until 2008. It was ultimately scrapped in 2014, and parts of its metal were cut up and sold as the luggage tags. But the legacy definitely lives on. Just recently, in June 2025, the original recovered cockpit was returned to a permanent museum exhibit right there in Gimli, bringing this incredible story completely full circle. So we're going to leave you with this final thought. While a cascade of technological breakdowns, corporate negligence, and procedural failures turned a state-of-the-art airplane into a giant glider, It was ultimately the irreplaceable, instinctual skill of human beings, a captain who just so happened to know how to fly a sailplane, that brought it safely to the ground. As our machines get smarter and smarter, we have to ask ourselves, are we still valuing the raw human skill required when all the screens go black?